start next one as well.
If I could just say, relax, you're among friends.
Oh, absolutely.
I know.
Absolutely.
It just means a lot, that's all. Okay, so just to introduce me, I'm Lisa Holmes. I have come from an educational background, post-compulsory education. I'm not a paramedic, but I've worked with the emergency services in the UK and here for many, many years, particularly paramedics, but with the forces and all those types of people in a teacher training mode and instructor training mode. So I've had experience with paramedics from that perspective. Working with ECU, I've been with the paramedic team now for 2 years, and I teach on the non-clinical units, one of which is a new unit, which is a professional practice unit, which is a foundation first year unit, and the second one is a reflective practice, so I see them again in the 3rd year and make sure they're reflecting appropriately through it. Looking at their clinical placements, some of the stuff that they get to do in the Northern Territories, and basically offering them the pastoral care that they need, because they get all this clinical, and I'm a non-clinical, soft and woolly person for them, really. I'm also been involved in an ALTC grant for a project to do with paramedic standards for practicum, because there are no standards for the placements for paramedics, so they kind of go in and we hope for the best, there's a bit of goodwill with the ambulance services, which is a bit of an alien world to me, because I'm driven by standards, competencies and all those types of things, having very clear duty and care really on these types of things.
Lisa, can I just ask you, is that the same grant that Richard Brightwell had? Oh, it was, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, good, I know
So
about
I was
that
involved
one.
on the tail end of that.
Excellent,
So
yes,
trying to
I do know
pull-
about that, yeah, no, that's fine.
Because it changed direction quite a few times.
Sure.
But in that, I got to talk to lots and lots of paramedics and lots of students. So I was able to go to conferences and interview people connected to that project. But also what tends to happen, and in my experience with paramedics, they love to talk and they love to share their stories. So I was getting lots and lots of stories, and I am naturally interested in those types of things, and I'm not necessarily affected by some of the stories. So I was watching this, and then I was looking at the students' reflections, and they're reflecting on their clinical practice as opposed to how they feel about it. So we can talk about how they feel about things, but they're not necessarily using it to do professional development or to prepare themselves for the emotional trauma that they might come across. So there's a gap. There's paramedics that love to tell their stories or want to share experience. Some are in a negative zone in mental health and feel that they want to help. And then there's these students that don't seem to be aware of the emotional challenges that they may face. So to cut a long story short, this is where my PhD, so it was an opportunity to do this study. So the working title at the moment is Exploring the Preparedness of Novice Paramedics for Mental Health Challenges of Paramedic Profession. The other interest I have is with the Aboriginal culture, and I truly believe that, by sharing experience with our youngers, if you like, and sharing the wisdom of the elders, we are imparting that experience. Because as I see it at the moment, we've got a raft of paramedics out there with all this untapped experience, untapped coping strategies, stories of survival that we're not tapping into to help to educate our students. So that's where that upshot is. So I need to give you a bit of context within that. So this is a short clip that kind of culminates everything I really want to say. With just fingers crossed.
Just before the clip,
yeah.
Can I just introduce Professor William Cohen? This is David Ward.
Very nice to meet you.
David is another PhD student who's just preparing material for his proposal. That's right. Excellent.
When we serviced the trip, we had problems with the IT today. So we've got a little trip now to make it work. She says, hopefully. No.
They're the people we need most when everything's gone wrong. They put their lives on the
the line to save ours.
Australia has a wonderful worldwide reputation of preparing outstanding paramedics.
For a decade now, paramedics have been voted Australia's most trusted profession. The new research shows it's the most dangerous job in the country.
No other occupational group in Australia has a higher fatality rate than paramedics.
Paramedics' fatality rate is 6 times the national average. Every 2 years, 1 paramedic is killed and 30 others are injured in road crashes. 10 more are seriously assaulted on the job. It makes you wonder why they do it.
9 times out of 10, someone calls us because they're scared or they're injured and very, very sick. So we get to go and make them have a better day, and that's a pretty good feeling every day.
Our AMBOs also suffer higher rates of work-related stress, anxiety, and suicide.
The risk of suicide among paramedics is very high. It may be much higher than any other occupation, and we need to come up with ways of combating this serious public health problem among paramedics.
So as you can see, I've cut Brian off there. It is a major problem. Lots of the statistical data is around injuries as opposed to the work-related stress. I think there are obvious reasons for that. It's a particularly sensitive area. Organisations don't want to reveal that information. There's compensation within the compensation framework. And a lot of the data that I'm getting is hearsay. It's personal communications. For example, recently there has been a lot of public and media interest in them. So we have headlines in the media that are connected to the suicides. But it's nothing new. But each time, what strikes me as interesting, we've got 2015, which is a few weeks ago, suicides reveal ambulance officer stress. But yet we've still got the same kind of things in 2010. No one seems to have been addressing the issue. And it seems to have kind of imploded. And there's been lots of groups getting together, and paramedics themselves, you know, as in history with veterans, tend to stand up for their own, or for their weaker, if you like. So there seems to be a great big push, particularly here in WA, but in the other states, things are changing, things are happening, and other people are getting involved in them. So when I'm trying for my proposal, trying to gather data is really difficult. I can give you an example: 4 suicides of paramedics in WA alone in the last 18 months, 2 of which were within a week of each other. But when you dig deeper, actually there's 6, but 2 weren't actually employed as paramedics at the time, but they had been paramedics previously. So the figures and the data is always skewed. So I have people that are willing to give me the information, but I don't want to be named. So it's those types of things that I can get on that information. For me, that's shocking, because these are the guys that are caring for us, and we don't seem to be reciprocating that in this forum. So when we talk about so when I think about my study and how my study fits, I'm looking at the overall context of focus area. So we looked at what people see, what the media are showing us, what the community now are more aware of. And there is, most recently, within the last days, the government have now said that there needs to be an inquiry. There's an internal inquiry in some of the ambulance services in WA. There's an internal inquiry going to be happening. So we've got the government policy, we've got the government being petitioned by paramedics and the community generally to say, look, we need to be doing something about this. Within the community, the health institutes, we've got universities that are all talking about it. Whether they're actually addressing it or not is another story. And I think everyone's kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think, for me, how many more people are going to go? How many more people are we going to lose? And we're looking at the rough end of the mental health. We're not actually focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder or the depression that goes with that. I've gone straight to the suicide and said, this is too many happening within it. Within the organisation, to give you an example, St John's Ambulance Service here in WA have got an internal inquiry. They are changing their wellbeing provision. This is probably to do with the fact that there's so much pressure going on, there's so much media attention to it, and there is a need for it. It's highly political and a highly sensitive area around there. We've got the unions. United Voice yesterday had a professor that specialises in post-traumatic stress disorder, lobbying for it, going on the radios. There's lots and lots going on out there. It's just keeping it moving. So for me and my study and my little tiny effort, I think because there's a much broader scope, is I'm looking at the individual and I'm looking at the knowledge, attitudes and beliefs, because the paramedics I've worked with have this tough exterior, they have this tough skin. And in years gone by, you know, when I think about the time where I worked with lots and lots of paramedics when they were starting to be registered in the UK, it was taboo. They didn't want to talk about mental health. We don't talk about that. We're just looking at, you know, the person there and what we do and what our processes are. You know, they won't necessarily openly access the mental health help available. Here in Australia, it seems to me that there's a lack of faith within the system for whatever reason, and I don't really want to get tied into that within the PhD, but I do acknowledge it, that there are other issues connected to that. But for me, you know, it's focusing on that individual and what that individual can do to help. So the data I have been able to come up with is how many paramedics there are. I had to trawl through lots of government reports. So I found that from the 11 Council of Australian Authority ambulances, members, ambulance services, there are 23,931 paramedics. And paramedics are a strange beast here because paramedics aren't registered, and the word paramedic or the title paramedic isn't protected in the form of you have to have a set of qualifications to be called that. So they are divided up between people. So we have 15,000 full-time employed paramedics, 5,900 volunteers, and 2,456 community first responders. And that's across, you know, in country, in the metro areas. It's a substantial amount of people that we need to look after.
This is WA?
This is Australia.
The whole of
Right. And we rely on, you can see proportionally, you know, 6,000 volunteers alone within that setup. I've never seen an organisation or a service that relies so heavily on volunteers within that structure. So when we look at ambulance-related incidents, so we're looking at 2012 to 2013, 4.2 million ambulance services responses. So there were 3.1 million incidents, but it's not always one ambulance that goes or one crew that go. 3.2 million patients. So for me, I look at the centre bit and I think 98% satisfaction. The paramedics are the most trusted profession over the last decade. They've been voted that several times. There are 11,507 responses every day. When I look at it in the context of the mental health part, that's, you know, potential traumatic incidents for these paramedics to go to in any one day. And when I look at the figures, it kind of does matter. You know, how do they cover these calls? They must be charging through those calls. Where's the downtime? You know, those things, appreciated in what they experience. You know, they can, when they get to the job, they have no idea sometimes what is going to happen, what's going to unfold, who they've got to deal with, what they've got to deal with, and what resources are available to them. So it's quite stressful with those kind of volume as well. So from my perspective for the study, I'm looking at these people and I'm thinking to myself, these paramedics are learning to cope on the job. They go to these incidents and they're having to cope with these things. What do? Do they talk to their family? Do they go to counselling services? But they're having to do this. Were they aware of this before they entered the job? And for me, I think we have a natural captive audience where we can address this issue from the learning phase. Because at the moment, from all the undergraduate programmes that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to all 16 accredited universities, the undergraduate course coordinators, and none of them at the moment have a formal process for preparing the students. Now, for me, preparing is raising awareness, promoting openness, because I don't think we can ever really prepare someone for what they're going to encounter, but what we can do is open up that dialogue, talk about those experiences. So each one of them, some of them are working towards it, some of them are working on some units, some of them include it in their mental health units, but the students seem to be more focused on, which they would be, on the patient's mental health, not necessarily their own. So back in 2012-13, we had 6,244 undergraduate novice paramedics. For me, that's quite a substantial number of people that we can open up, you know, discussion about mental health, about their own well-being and how they can, you know, prepare themselves for the job. They are, and I agree, they're very focused on the clinical side of things. And when I've spoken to students in the past, And when I was thinking about doing this study, I spoke to an awful lot of people. And, you know, I'd speak to a third year that was about to graduate and they're terrified, saying, oh, I'm going to forget this, I'm going to forget this sequence. And I would say to them, you know, how about emotionally? Do you feel emotionally strong enough? I haven't even thought of that, I haven't even considered it. And that, for me, they were already going into these situations highly stressed with no awareness of what may happen. And they are very focused, but I think if they've got something in their back pocket, if they've got some kind of strategy, and for me, these are the policy makers, the managers of tomorrow, these are our paramedics, and the current culture is we don't talk about this. These are the guys that are going to change it. So they are going in, and it won't happen in 5 minutes, it won't change the culture, but over time, I hope that it will do. Not just this study, there are lots of other studies that will go on with this. So I think these are a bit of a captive audience. It seems a shame that they're untapped at the moment, as well as our veteran paramedics. So for the purposes of this study, I keep referring to them as students as novice paramedics, and for me it kind of contextualises where they are. So for my study, they will be from accredited university programs. They will be enrolled in the undergraduate degree in paramedicine. So they will be in their early stages of learning. They'll be in training, learning their skills. They will be developing their skills and knowledge on their placements, and they will gaining experience on again those placements and the simulations within the classroom. So things at the moment are very much focused on the patients and the care they give, and that's goes without saying. But I do think that there is an opportunity to incorporate in that anecdotal stuff. I've seen it in the classroom where you'll have someone teaching and they will talk about the experience and how they felt, but it's nothing formal. It's kind of hit and miss. So some students will hear it and click into it, but others won't. They don't tend to talk to each other about it. And I think the day and age now is things are changing where people do talk about mental health more. It is becoming quite, an open topic. So I think we have an opportunity here to web that in there. So the formative research, I think what I found out very early on is I've trawled, I've searched, I've spent many an hour with the wonderful library staff, and we've all been scratching our head about finding specific information, and I think this will go on throughout the PhD. I mean, whilst there is a literature review, this will go out and this will grow. Particularly now it's in the media spotlight, more people are aware of it, so more people are writing more articles connected to it. So I will continue to investigate how well novice paramedics are prepared for mental health issues, and I want to stretch it out to globally, because I know that lots of our students are going over to London Ambulance, and I know that they have a programme and they've included it in their induction programme now. So it's looking at what works, what people are doing, how other people are thinking about this. To continue to review the literature, because as I said, it's going to be released. People have already said they've written articles about it, but they're waiting for it to be published. Scope the literature for best practice approaches for preparedness. Really nothing in paramedicine. I've avoided nursing. There is lots in nursing, and there is lots to be learnt there, but I think they are in a clinical setting. They're not in this non-clinical having to deal with the elements, deal with Joe Public, deal with everybody else at the same time, so it's quite a different environment. So I've looked at what journalists do, how journalists prepare journalists. Photographers are the same. They're quite intense programs, even here. They talk about it, they address the issues. So it's looking at how they do it and what we might learn from them. And obviously to continue to search for evidence of paramedic collective stories. There are some books that have been published on paramedic stories. There are some articles, lots of it comes from America, so it's very Americanised. And I've tried some of it in the reflective practice unit with the students, and it's so Americanised they kind of switches them off. So we need something Australian that they can relate to, talking about the bush or talking about our areas or coastal kind of things, so they can contextualise it and relate it to their own practice. So I decided that with my lovely supervisors to do a narrative study. I looked at a phenomenological study, but it kind of doesn't quite fit. So my view is that narrative study fits. So the definition that I've used for this is the collection of individual stories, their experiences, and the discussion of the meaning of those stories. So it's really, looking at the story. Everyone can tell a story, everybody loves telling stories, but it's looking at what that meaning, what's really being said. So the purpose really was to use the stories from surviving and veteran paramedics to raise awareness and promote openness. raising awareness for me is registering it, but promoting that openness probably is probably the biggest strategy that they can have towards mental health well-being. And it's not just focusing on the negative side, it's focusing on how we maintain our well-being. So I do talk a lot about the challenges of the mental health, but really I'm promoting the well-being behind it. To better prepare our paramedics, novice paramedics for the challenges, and to provide the novice paramedics with an understanding of coping strategies that have been used by our surviving veterans, because they are the wisdom, they are our elders in this situation, and they have something to offer. And from the veterans that I've already spoken to, by sharing their stories is actually a positive experience for them, because they feel that they can make a change, they can help others. So really the emphasis is placed on the stories and the voices of those paramedics. I'm very aware that I don't necessarily want to retell those stories in my voice. I want to retell the stories in the voice of the paramedics, which is the most credible forum for them. So just to, again, I keep referring to the veteran paramedics. So they're my sample population. I'm really after their wisdom. So I've looked at it, because I'm very visual, so I look at it as in blocks. So they've gone through the training, skills and knowledge and experiences of our novice paramedics, but they've survived, they've coped, they've strategised. Whether they've done it consciously or not consciously, but they've done it. Whether it's talking to their colleagues, whether it's sharing incidents with their family, or whether going out and riding their motorbike. You know, there are lots of different strategies, and from people I've spoken to, it is about downtime, about offloading in some way. So they have this untapped wisdom. So I didn't want to just channel it down and say they have to be retired and they have to be, you know, what we consider to be veterans. These could be people on the road, these could be volunteers in the countryside. But I've kind of set a 10-year experience base. But really someone with 5 years could have, or 2 years, could have that experience. But it's whether they've developed those strategies. But also it's the stories, their stories of others. Now it could be stories of people that have passed. It could be, you know, what it was about that person that maybe couldn't cope with that situation, what other factors were there, those types of conversations with these veteran paramedics. So I'm kind of channeling it down because there's a raft. When I kind of thought about how I was going to find these people, I haven't had to. I've been to two. I've been to one conference and spoken, and I've been down to an event that was held for paramedics in Cottesloe, and I went to another meeting in Melbourne, and I spoke about the PhD and what I plan to do. And one of the first things was people's phone numbers, people's emails. I'd really love to talk to you. And there has to be a willingness for that veteran, because I'm very aware ethically that I don't want to cause any mental or stress on these individuals. So they have to be willing to share their story, because by knocking on the door and asking people to share their stories, I'm not really sure that that's really good for them mentally at this stage. And as I'm not qualified in that area, then coming to me is a much easier sample. So I need to investigate more about that, and I'll talk about that later, but that's where I've come from. And I've got over more than, I wanted 30, and I've got more than 30 at this time. I think what it does is actually demonstrates that desire to share, which is untapped, completely untapped.
The 30 that you've got, could you just elaborate on which states, territories they might be from?
Northern Territories, here in WA, and Queensland at this time, and then there's someone now in Melbourne that wants to talk to me. Here in WA, I wanted to get a balance between volunteers and perceived qualified paramedics, so metro and country, and the Northern Territories. And naturally what's happened, I've got a real spread of younger experienced paramedics, some that have retired, some that have been very close to the edge, and have been there, and it's just all male, female, a huge mix. I thought I would get, personally, more females that would want to talk about it, but actually that's quite opposite. And that demonstrates to me that there is a niche, there is a need for this. I'm really sorry about this. It's really hard to do this mouse on the screen. Okay. So where we thought about with this qualitative research, so the first phase really, and the phase that I'm really anxious to get started on, because there's no literature, because there's very little data, I needed an argument to back up this PhD. So what has been discussed is that I would survey by questionnaire 16 undergraduate course coordinators, all happy. I've spoken to, because there's lots of forums where we all meet, and they're all happy and waiting for me to question them on it. But really, I'm asking them very simply, what do you do? What do you do to prepare your students? Is it spoken about in what forum is it? One, in New Zealand, they have a chaplain come in and talk to the students. They go down the very resilience process with resilience training. Others don't talk about it at all. So there is a mix, but there's a definite gap. And then I was looking at, averaging out 150 novice paramedics, investigating how they feel and what they fear most about the job. And here, what I'm looking for is for them to demonstrate they're actually not thinking about the mental health well-being. So I'm not actually going to state, are you frightened about the mental health being? It's about, what is it? And I almost guarantee the majority of them will say, it's the clinical, am I going to forget my procedures? Those 150, I'm hoping that will be taken from each of those states, the 3 states that the main sample's coming from. The 3 universities that I've been in contact with are more than happy for their students to be used, because really what they want to know what the outcome of the study is.
Which are the 3 universities?
With ECU, Central Queensland and La Trobe at this time. But
So
others are
Victoria.
making noises, which is really great.
So Victoria, Queensland,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
WA, right?
And we, of course, because we have links with Northern Territory, we link in there, so there are people there that have gone up to that. So that's one part of the initial part of the process, and then undertake semi-structured interviews with 30 of the veterans, if I can whip it down to 30, across the state. Now, it may well be, because I'm having such a, influx of people, I could broaden that geographical area out. I just need to be aware of how much time this is going to take, trying to focus on how many people I can do whilst I'm in a particular area. And I'm trying to utilise conferences, because everyone is in one place. So I'm trying to be sensible about how I manage it. So that will come to fruition when it's more formalised. Well, obviously, I want to identify sources through those semi-structured interviews. That to contextualise their story. Some people keep diaries, some people have photographs, some people have something that symbolises what they use. One chap that I spoke to has a pebble in his pocket. And I just wanted to see if there was something else there. To see whether there was, it could be that when they're telling their story we would have a newspaper article of the incident. It could be, this is what saved me. I don't know if that's going to be used, but that's an uncovered area, but I know that there's something valuable there from the conversations I've had with paramedics. There tends to be something. And then what I would do is transcribe those interviews and look at the data, look for themes, chronological sequence and scope of stories. At this time, depending on what that data reveals, and I am structured in the approach, but I'm flexible enough to go with what's going to happen. But I would like to look at a career path of a paramedic and have those stories across that timeline. But it depends on what comes out of these stories. Because what I don't want to do is focus on the end of their time. It's what happened in the beginning, middle and end. How did you develop those strategies? What were the triggers? What did you do? How did you cope? Those types of things. So that's what I would do initially. And then the second part is to select 15 of the previous participants to carry out open-ended interviews. I don't know whether that will be a hard process, actually looking at the initial ones. I think what will happen is there will be a willingness to talk further. There will be a willingness for some people to want to be recorded. Some won't. Some will realise that they want to keep it private. And also, I don't want all of the same story, 15 similar stories. So it's selecting the stories across male, female, age, experiences, whereabouts in their career they were. So for me, that will be the determining factor of whether we carry on with a timeline for the paramedic career or we just have a kind of pattern of what happens. The open-ended interviews will provide deeper understanding and record the stories and utilise the secondary sources. I think the people that really do want to tell their stories want to share everything, and I want to credit them and honour that and use it if I can, but I don't want to use it if it's not necessary. But I want to give them the opportunity to do that. I think one of the main things for me is it's a collaborative approach. It's about working with them. It's not about taking their story and saying, oh, thanks very much, off I go. It's about them being part of the process. Because already relationships are forming, and I haven't even got approval for this, you know. So it's building those relationships and having that honest dialogue and saying, you know, at the moment, this is just a thought at this time. From those open-ended interviews, I'd catalogue and use restoring to reconstruct the narrative, which means I would transcribe the stories, I would edit them, because as people tell stories, but it doesn't necessarily go in order, so I would place it in the order, key themes and timelines, and then collaborate with them to make sure it is their voice and that they do agree with it, it is their personal story. Some of the ways, some people don't like to be recorded videoed, so they can do it auditory, they can write it, so there's a variety of things that they'll be able to do within. So what do I want to do with all this data? Well, because I have an educational background, I really do feel that we need to focus on the learning phase of the paramedics, because I think elsewhere there's lots of pressure. If we go back to the framework, there's lots going on elsewhere. But what I can do is create an educational resource. Now that educational resource will be based on the data that I collect, so I can't say what it's going to look like. I'd like to think that it will be, there's a thing that's been created in education at the moment where you flip over the stories of somebody and it tells them about their experience within teaching. That's fantastic. I had a play with it, I loved it. And I'm thinking of something along those lines, but I really want to go with what I've got and what create from there. But really it has to fit this framework for me. There has to be an opportunity for students to be able to engage with the stories and experiences of the paramedics. Again, they have to be credible stories, they have to be the words of the paramedics. What do I know? You know, within that. And they're going to relate to different stories. They need to be able to have the opportunity to reflect on it. They need to review and discuss between themselves. They need to have downtime personally to reflect on it. And then they need to, you know, conceptualise that, to relate it to their learning, to apply it to the scenarios that they're going to do. What would you do if? How would you cope with? For example, at the moment, in Reflective Practice Unit, we talk about emotional pie and how many pieces of the emotional pie you've got. I can then relate this to paramedic stories, because at the moment I'm using clinical nurse-driven stories. I'm not using paramedic stories, and there's a real gap there. And what that does really is they're becoming more aware of the trauma and support available. They are becoming more aware that it is real, that, you know, being healthy and having mental health well-being will help them be better paramedics. And I think it's their relating to it and internalising that so it becomes natural to talk about it. And of course I have a budget. Because it's a limited budget, and I will look for funding connected to this, but at this point, that's my minimum. And one of the things I really do recognise is my own professional development. I need to develop myself in able to deal with these individual people. I don't want to do anything that would distress anyone, that would cause them to start to remember things that they don't need to remember. That's why it's really important that they're coming to me. So I'm going on a 2-day course, mental health first aid, and whilst it's learning about the whole mental health first aid and what you do in those situations, how you talk to people with mental health problems, the lady that runs it is quite happy to talk to me on a separate note, to help me with questions and how I would question active listening skills for people with mental health. I think it's really important. I have an idea, but I don't know for sure, so I need to really investigate that. And the other side of it, I am a very empathetic person. I am emotionally invested, so I am aware that I need to self-guard myself in this situation. Before Christmas, reading all the articles, it got quite dark, so you know I need to do that, and I am very aware of my own emotional well-being, and actually have used that as a teaching and learning resource in itself when I've been talking to other staff members. So just in short, really, I will be attending seminars and conferences. I will be doing that to keep myself current, but they're the mainstays where all these people are. So it's organising, you know, a room to make available, so there's a cost connected to that. And it's really, you know, begs stealing borrowing, you know. If Paramedics Australia have hired a room for the day and I can get it for 2 hours at the end of the day, that's what I'll do, you know, those type of things. And people appreciate that type of thing anyway. And the travel accommodation, transit subscription. I plan to do that myself. I know it's a huge undertaking, but I'll give it a go and we'll see. For the projects we've used another company that will really, really, really fast. I will if I have to, but if I don't have to, I will. And the filming and editing, I've got some colleagues in broadcasting here that have said that they would kindly help me with it. So, you know. They're my sources, they're on the thoughts. And lastly, really to sum up, is what I said before really, is if we can start to change the ideals and the mindset of the students that are going into the service and into the ambulance service, wherever they may be, I think what we can do is promote that mental health wellbeing and have those conversations. And I think if we link it into the Aboriginal culture of the sharing wisdom of the elders, then these people will have, let's use a sponge-like with this type of thing. So then they will then be willing to share with others and look out for their own colleagues. So I think this is just a small part of a huge move to protect our paramedics, but it's the little bit that I can probably contribute to. So that's that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie.
Superbly, thank you. And I know I knew the answer to those questions, but I wanted you to make it clear that you've done all that a lot, and you've got the entire breadth of the country involved in this.
Okay. Look, I've got a few comments, which you can take or leave, entirely up to you. I think you need at the beginning, that there needs to be more of an underlying framework on which the research is sitting, and you've got quite a choice here. For me, because my discipline area is psychology, and I spent so many years looking at resilience, to me that would be an obvious one to use. And if you go down that path, I would suggest that you look at Michael Unger's work in terms of resilience and use the framework that they've developed over time, which is one way that you can go. I noticed at the beginning, which I loved, was that one here where you had context and focus area. And when you looked at the individual and you had the attitudes, the knowledge and beliefs, that's another way in which you can actually, or another area, or framework, basically, that you can use. So you can use attitude theory. And if you wanted to use attitude theory, then my suggestion would be to use the work of Zanna and Rempel, who developed who proposed a particular definition of attitudes and then went on to look at how do you understand what an attitude is, and they based it on emotion, beliefs and knowledge. So you're already doing that. So that is another framework that you could just rest all of this on if you wanted to. And it would be quite easy to do. And the third one that you could look at if you wanted to, again, would be Bronfenbrenner's systemic theory, or systems theory. Because again, what you're doing when you looked at that diagram with the context and focus area, basically you're using Bronfenbrenner's ideas as a basis from which you're working anyway. So there are three ideas that you could use as a theoretical framework, and I think that's possibly, you could add something in there which will be of use to you.
I think it would bring it, just scaffold it more.
Yes, yeah, it should rest on, a PhD should rest on some theoretical framework, and one of those three would be more than adequate. I like resilience, obviously, because that's my area. And I think you even used the term in your talk, and I see that that's for me, what you're doing here is you are wanting to build the resilience of the novice paramedics. That's really what you're wanting to do. So that whatever adversity they are faced with, they are going to be able to cope with it. That's resilience. So to me, the resilience fits really well with this. I love it, you know, and I think it just makes sense to use that. But equally, attitude theory would be another one. If you wanted to go to Bronfenbrenner, and he's pretty old by now, really, but systems theory is still very much part of what we do anyway. So that's the in terms of the, and I think you've done a wonderful job in terms of why you want to do this and what you're hoping to get out of it. I think it's fantastic. I would also suggest that in the narrative approach, there are two people that you should look at. One is Carol Reisman, and the other is Julian Rappaport. Reisman has got a particular approach to narrative methodology that I think would be absolutely brilliant, because you've got it there, but what it does is it provides you again with evidence and a framework that you've got it there. It's just, it's instead of sort of it coming out of the ether, you've got something to bed it down on. With your, I'm going to jump a little bit and just forgive me here. With your part 1 and part 2, I think there's a hell of a lot of work in there. There really is a fortune of work. I think there's almost 2 PhDs in there. What I would suggest is in part 1, where you're looking at, do your survey of your undergrad coordinators, absolutely fine. Do your novice people, paramedics, fine. And then you came to the 30 interviews, was it?
Yeah.
Or the first one. Yeah, the 30 veteran paramedics. I think you're going to have to acknowledge this bias, because if people are coming to you, they want to talk. There's no question about it. And it may be a particular type of person that wants to talk. So if you're going to go down that path, you are absolutely going to have to acknowledge that there is bias in your data, because otherwise examiners will pick you up on that. And that's okay. You can do that. That's not a problem. But I don't know why you would do part 2 and select 15 additional open-ended interviews. You know what I would rather do? I would take your 30 interviews, do your 30, and actually you may not want to do 30. You may only want to do 15 to 20. And I would, when you're writing this up, I would say that you will do it until you get saturation. Because you may get saturation after 22 interviews. Why are you doing the other 8? You're just wasting your time, really. So I would put there that you would do it until saturation. And I would use Reisman's narrative approach to extract the information. And I would simply have a research question such as, what are the experiences of veteran paramedics? That's all. So you are not actually leading anybody. You're not, you just want them to tell you what their experiences are. That's the basic question. Then obviously during the interviews, if you want clarification, or you would say, tell me a little bit more about X, or tell me a little bit more about Y, absolutely fine. I wouldn't do those 15 extra interviews, okay? Because I would, whatever you're going to do, I would do in those 20 to 30 that you're going to do. But what I would do in part 2 is, if you're in different areas, so you're in, where were we, Victoria, Queensland and whatever, and I would run 3 focus groups in each of those areas, and maybe 8 to 10 of the veteran veteran paramedics. Get them to come, have them together, and what you're doing then is you're actually checking out. You will have analysed your 30 interviews or however many you do. Use that as a way of checking out whether the data is reflecting what other people are saying. And also there may be new information that comes through. And I always find with focus groups, when people get together as well, they feed off one another. So you may get a lot more information coming out of that, rather than doing another separate, whatever we were going to do, another 15 additional interviews. I would do, let's say 3, 1 in Queensland if you're there, 1 in Victoria, and I don't know, well, 1 in Northern Territory if you want to do 4, and 1 in WA if that's what you want to do. But I think that will give you far more information, and it's member checking as well of the information you got in part 1, rather than just repeating the interviews. I just think you'll get better, but it's up to you, obviously. I just think you'll get better information. And one of the outcomes that I see from this, and I love the educational resource, I think it's brilliant, I think it's wonderful. But I also think that what you can get out of this is a model. So you are actually developing a model. From what people are telling you, what would need to, and it can feed into your educational resource. So I would develop my model first, and then whatever information that model shows you, one of the outcomes of that will be an educational resource, absolutely. It will be maybe modification of existing training programs. I would hope, actually, that that's what would happen. That's what I think you would like to happen, and I think that would be brilliant. But I see you're doing so much work here. Develop a model. How does all this fit together with what people are telling you? Is there a trajectory? And if there is a trajectory, how does it fit together? And build up this model. Now, you can build up your model, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can build up your model after your first 30 interviews, and then present it in your focus groups and say, once you've had your conversation with them, look, I've developed this model, what do you people think? Does this reflect what you're going through? And if they say, no, you're talking absolute, codswallop or whatever, okay, maybe, Lynn, that wasn't such a good idea. But it may be, yeah, that makes sense, but I'd add another step in here, or, And then when you publish, you're actually publishing, or one of the papers, because you'll get probably, I don't know, you'll get 6 or 8 papers out of this. One of the papers could be on the development of a model that will impact on training of paramedics. At least that's what I think could possibly happen. It's just so fabulous that don't lose it. You've got so much brilliance happening over here that I think you can kind of add to it.
This is high praise.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's fabulous. Now, when you are doing your interviews, I think you're also going to need, and I'll just go back to just random thoughts now. You've got, you've got volunteers and you've got veteran paramedics. The information may be different. Now, I don't know what you do with that. You could either have, say, I'm going to do 15 interviews with volunteers, 15 interviews or thereabouts, whatever, till saturation, with veteran paramedics. and I'm going to analyse each and see what the common themes are. That's quite a nice approach. And then use that commonality. I suspect, but I'm no expert in this area, I suspect that there would be a lot of commonality and themes coming through in terms of their experiences. So that could be one way. Another way would be you can just ditch the volunteers and just use your veteran paramedics. I think that's a bit of a pity because you've got such a lovely presentation of who actually does the job that why would you want to lose them? So then I would separate it. I would do the interviews with both using Reisman's approach. I would then analyse them separately, and then I would have a chapter in the PhD or a discussion that looks at the commonalities and brings it together, because that will feed into your focus groups and into your model. And then again with your focus groups, who are these people? Maybe half in each focus group could be volunteers, maybe 5 volunteers, 5 veteran paramedics. I absolutely agree with you with your own self-care. I think there are 2 things when you apply for ethics that they will require of you, I can tell you right now. One is that when you are interviewing, and even the focus groups, you need to have a series of brochures where you will be able to provide then with the names and contact people of people and organisations that they can actually go and talk to should they experience any distress or anxiety after they've actually been through the interview or whatever. For yourself, my suggestion, and put it into your ethics, because they're going to make you do that anyway, is get yourself, go to the School of Psychology, or use my name, it doesn't matter, but you need, just say that you will meet with a psychologist or a counsellor on a, I don't know, weekly basis if you like, just to debrief your experiences. It doesn't matter who, just as long as it's somebody that's qualified, and just give them a name. Okay, there are plenty of people in the School of Psychology, or use my name if you like. I don't mind, but I can tell you that Kifkins will make you do it anyway. So you might as well just put it in there, and it shows that you've actually thought about it as well. And that's really all I got to say. I think it's fabulous. I do. I think you've got the most wonderful project, and good luck with it. It's terrific. It's huge, really. I think it's huge, and I think you can cut down certainly the 15 interviews, the open-ended interviews. You're getting all that information anyway. Just use Reisman's approach. You'll get all that information, and then if you want to do a part 2, you don't even have to do a part 2. This is big enough just with the first part. And I'm being honest. Honestly, it's big enough. But if you absolutely insist on doing part 2, do focus groups. Honestly, don't go and do in-depth interviews again.
I like the idea of the framework actually, and taking that to the focus groups, so then they feel that they've contributed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because that's what is the overwhelming thing about everyone wants to be involved.
Yeah, and I'm sure they do, yeah.
I think it does help to validate the information that's been given, that they can then hear what everyone else has said, and that you've got a good idea that that is what people think. Because that was when I spent 20 years as a paramedic, and that was my first thought, was okay, you're getting people telling you stories, but is that a true representation of what a paramedic with many years of experience would think? So I think the focus groups is a great idea. I think it brings it back, everyone gets to hear all that, and that validates, yes, that's what people think, and that they're all involved in that process as well. So I think I'd definitely go for that.
Fantastic. So I think what we're looking at then is being well aware, as you pointed out, that in these focus groups you're going to get massive amounts of information. What we can do is part of this journey is to prepare you for life after the PhD. So the focus group validates the model, possibly more basic, but then all that other rich information that you gather during those focus groups, that can be your data set for beyond your PhD.
No, absolutely. It's endless.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You'll be busy for years.
I just think there's an opportunity for
You've got a
network to
job
happen.
for life.
Yeah.
But
I
I think
also-
it's fabulous.
I liked what you said also about separating the information going from volunteers and career officers as well, because I think if you're going in and you're going to use a model for career officers in the education setting, I think it may struggle, lose some value if people think, well, that's based, half that information is based on what volunteers think. That's not applicable to career officers. It becomes, less
Sure.
important, less value. I mean, it may be common themes. I think there could be quite a few differences in there. Just
Oh, okay.
anecdotally.
And I don't know.
I don't know,
so
but I think it's a
I've
great
no idea.
idea because it will, and you'll have that value there where you can say, yep, you've separated off so people can't say, well, half of the cohort was volunteers, so half the information doesn't apply to us because we're career officers, we're tougher, we do it all the time, we're not, weekend warriors or whatever, so I think that's critical too, definitely.
And it depends on the volunteers, because some volunteers in the country might as well be full-time paramedics, whereas others are, weekends, so,
Yeah.
Excellent.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for
Wonderful.
your patience with the test.
Oh, no, that's enough.
We've all been there.
We're all there, and Matt Lawley's not the greatest. I have
Well,
to
at least this
say.
room's going to be
That-
investigated now. They're going to fix the audio and stuff, so because you can't have that when you're trying to stand there, find out
No,
what
it's
the screen
ridiculous.
can't do that.
We have this constant,
Yeah.
one of the challenges of IT is
But